All right. Well, we are recording. So I'm gonna jump in and just kind of set the stage for today. I'm not sure we sent out a topic, but today I wanted to really kind of group up after really 12 months of this conversation around the path to a million. One of the things I'm super proud of this group is that many of you actually hit that and became true MREAs. The first step of becoming an MREA is to earn it, right? And I think we have potentially even 10 new ones in our group, in our network, for the first time hitting that GCI of a million. So our goal was to really focus on what we believed were some of the core competencies of business owners. It's difficult to build a real estate business that is, one, highly productive, but two, highly profitable without moving from being an entrepreneur to a business owner. And I promise you, if you don't, well, you won't want to stay there. Because some of our group got there as just sheer entrepreneurs. Like they were like head down, hardworking, showing up, putting deals together, like muscling their way to becoming a millionaire, right? An MREA. And our vision is that it feels good while doing it as well. That is a smooth path to earning and then netting and then potentially giving that million away. So over the last few months, you've seen me show up month after month. And that's largely because we have wanted to have a real focus at the end of the year around decision making and how we use sort of models, like last month, how we use models to think and then make decisions. Today, we're going to begin this conversation by talking about biases, right? Biases that we all have. And this word probably has come up more so in the last couple of years than we would have liked to see it come up. Unfortunately, it's come up in biases towards people and biases towards culture and biases towards, right, you name it, there are biases. But today, I'm gonna walk through some conversations around what bias really is in business. And then we're gonna get to the end of our conversation and we're gonna talk a little bit about like how do we head into January with the right frame of mind? How do we head into January sort of taking some of the things and concepts we've learned about and show up as CEOs in our business in 2022? Human beings make thousands of decisions every day. Anyone feel that's your job? Like you show up every morning and there's decisions to be made. Like people call on you to make decisions. I shared last week in my letter that Via, you and I were chatting quite a bit while I was away in Maui. So thank you for all your recommendations, by the way. They were amazing. But interestingly enough, like I don't know that I love Maui. I don't know that I'll ever go back. Don't kill me if you love Maui. But what the brilliant part of that 7 days was for me is I didn't make any decisions. Like I just said, like, I'm not here to make decisions. You make all the decisions. I will show up and support it. Like I'm going to be the cheerleader of the 7 days. And here's why: because we make thousands of decisions every single day, so that getting a break feels so good. But that also told me a story about myself that I am probably making too many decisions and I am probably not smoothing out the decision-making process such that it takes less energy. And so I started going back to some notes I had taken from the previous few months, and that's sort of the topic for today. How do we allow our brains, one, to make the decisions we need to make, but not make ones that we don't need to make, and actually have some models around these decisions that we're making too. To brain scientists, these shortcuts that our brain oftentimes makes are known as biases. Now, biases that we all have around decisions that we make are are, to be fair, neither good nor bad, right? We're not talking about like the biases we mentioned earlier that our world has problems with, but these are just biases that Darren, you have, and Blanca, you have, and Matt, you have, and Leslie, you have, and I have. These are just natural biases that we have. They're neither good nor bad. They just are, is what brain scientists say. They help us in certain cases, and they hinder us in other cases. But by understanding what the main biases that human beings have are, we can decide in that moment, is this bias helping me or is it harming me in business? I believe most of these have the potential in our world to harm us. So by understanding them, by having some conversations around them, and actually by using, like we always say, by using this conversation to coach your team and your business partners and your staff and your agents around, it'll ensure that we are building businesses that make great decisions. There's the Neuro Leadership Institute is a phenomenal institute. It's a membership institute. I've been part of that for the last couple of years as I've been sort of really focused on understanding how humans make decisions. It's about a $5,000 a year commitment to be part of this leadership institute. And there's courses that you go through, there's curriculum that you can plug into. But this is part of their curriculum, is taking these biases and coaching and teaching us how to understand them. So the first one, everybody has it, is the similarity bias. And I want us to think about our businesses. I don't want you necessarily think about real estate per se, but just think about yourself as a business owner, right? An entrepreneur turned business owner. You lead people, you lead customers or clients, you are thinking strategically. We prefer what is like us over what is different. It's a bias. We may immediately pull back on that and say, no, not me. Like I'm open, I'm inclusive, but that's not what we're talking about here. The brain has a bias to what is similar to us versus what is different. So think about your activities. We have a bias to continue to do activities that is similar to the activities that we've always done. It is why change is so difficult for us. But we also have a bias when it comes to people decisions. Like I hear that a lot, man, if I could just find an agent just like me. I know that, right? Because our brain would like us to have this bias of finding someone like me, right? And then we engage more with people like us, right? We spend time more with people like us. We have to be careful about that. I have to be careful about that, right? I know that my brain has a bias to people like me. And so if I'm constantly around people like me, well, understand it will be a hindrance to the growth of my business, because businesses grow based on encouraging, adopting new ideas. And new ideas come from people different than me. They think different than me. They act different than me. Many people looked originally at the partnership that Ben and I formed, and they're like, wow, like I didn't see that coming. And that's because we are different humans. My similarity bias for years actually said, no, not me. Like you're different. You think differently, you act differently, you talk differently. You're just a different person. It's brilliant together. We have to be careful about this similarity bias. The neuro lab said it occurs because humans are highly motivated to see themselves and those who are similar in a favorable light. Now let that sink in. We like to think good things about ourselves, and it's healthy for to some degree, right? But we like to see ourselves in a favorable light. We like to see others like us winning as well. And if we're not careful, we'll move towards a similarity bias. We instinctively create in-groups and out-groups, boundaries between who we consider close to us and who lives on the margins. We generally have a favorable view of our in-group, but a skeptical or potentially negative view of the out-group. Beware of the similarity bias. So let's just take a moment and I'd love for the group to raise their hand. Where do you believe the similarity bias can creep up? Whether it's people, whether it's activity, where in our business do you think that we have to be careful about this? Who wants to share?
I'm happy to share. I think this is fascinating, Chris. And where my head went is, and this might be different for me than the group. Let me think about using my words. So if you work for, I wonder how this is best approached, because I think that people are blind to this. I think you're right. As a female, when I see boards or I see leaderships that are all a whole bunch of white males, and I just don't think they see it, I wonder how, my mind immediately went there. I just wonder how one approaches that without offending that bias so much that you're putting yourself in the out group.
Yeah. Well, I don't think you're wrong. And that's just one, right? It could be, so to be fair, it's been interesting, right? In our world of meeting recently with some of the top search firms for people in the world. And one of the first questions they ask is, who are you looking for? And my immediate response amongst our partners is, I am looking for someone that doesn't look like us. And I'm not making it a physical thing, but I believe that we need people that come from a different perspective, come from different, right, upbringings, because if we're not careful, we instinctively create in groups, and oftentimes it's just, you label it via, and not the word label, but you identify it as white or male, but mostly that's because they came from the same place, they came from the same country, they came from the same state, they came from the same industry, they came from the same gender, and they think alike, and so they have a similarity bias. Yeah, we can oftentimes identify in other people because we feel like we're in the out group, but it's and I think that's very real. But at the same time, even in groups that are flip it, right? It is white female or.
Oh yeah, I have it. I look at I have a group that same thing. We all have it. I have it for sure. Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's a very real place, like beginning to look at the leadership teams that we're part of, or the boards that we're part of, the PTAs that we're part of, that it doesn't matter where we're at.
For this group, I think what's interesting, Chris, and where my next thought was, okay, how can I create a safe environment, and an environment where I'm not blocking out, where I'm allowing my people to say, hey, you're blind spotted, you're blind spotted, and you're, whatever. And sometimes I probably do a good job with that, and sometimes I probably don't, right? That's
yeah. So I would say for that purpose, and then Darren, I want to hear you, is, remember last month when we talked about 9 mental models, and we created this lattice work, and we put these mental models up, and it allowed us to ask ourselves, now those around us need to be using those mental models. That's why I keep on talking about it with all the people that are sort of in the rooms that I show up with, because I want us to all think about those 9s and say, hey, Chris, I think you have not used inversion. Hey, Chris, that's totally Occam's razor. Hey, Chris, same thing with these 5. Hey, Chris, are you acting under a similarity bias? Like when we have conversations about biases, we're able to identify them in ourselves and others. Darren?
So yeah, for sure, kind of following along with what's been kind of said, but also I think part of your question was like, where do we by default, or where could this hurt us in business wise? Which I think your number one, like what you talked about is probably my number one, where you were looking at Ben and you're like, dude, like you're super different. Like, how are we going to be in partnership? Like, how are we going to get along? And so for me, it's like hiring people that aren't like me, right? Like looking for diversity in skill set, and looking for diversity in personality, and looking for diversity ethnically or language skill, or I just went through a process of looking for a lender that's fluent in Spanish, and it's like made me think, oh, like it would be pretty amazing on my next hire if I tried to find somebody that also speaks a second language, and so But my default is I get along with people that are like me. And so it's like you want to, kind of look at that. And same with clients, where it's like, how much do I invest in clients that are super different than me? And do I treat them exactly the same? So those would be two spots for me that I try to stay focused on and be aware of.
Yep. And the one thing I'll pull out, and maybe as we take notes about where this might show up, think about your skill set, right? Think about it organizationally within your real estate business. Does everyone have the same skill? Are we all highly engaging people? Well, that could be a challenge or a problem if we're hiring towards that similarity bias. Jody?
Yeah, funny. Like we were literally just in a conversation about something like this right before I came on here, because we just had a third interview with a potential team member. And one of the struggles is that she's just very different than all of us, and not in physical appearance, but just in, I don't know, the way she carries herself and whatnot. And so I guess my struggle with it is, we're really proud of how cohesive our team is. And our team is really cohesive because it's not that we're all alike in personality, but we all have very complementary personalities, and everybody's, like it's a really tight group, and we're really excited about that. And so we're super hesitant to, to look for somebody that's different in, that could disrupt that. And so I guess I'm more interested in your take on how do you balance those two things, right? On one hand, you got this really great thing going and you don't want to disrupt the apple cart. And on the other hand, might we be missing out on great opportunities for diversifying our points of view and our beliefs and, whatnot. So I'm curious about how you guys handle that.
I think where I would, the first place I would start to identify where this similarity bias may be a challenge versus where, remember, we started by saying all of these things are neither good nor bad. In some parts of our business, similarity bias is a very good thing. I start with the values of our organization. Are the values of our organization similar to each person that we bring into the organization? Skill set could be wildly different. Perspective could be wildly different. But if the value set or the mission is similarity, falls into a similarity bias, then we're probably using this to good. And then it's just a self conversation or a group conversation of, hey, are we actually being too exclusive to personality type or the way we think here, because we just have so much fun together and we enjoy that. And it's going to be disruptive if someone comes in with black hat thinking, because none of us do. And right, those are the thinking hats is a great example of that. Like we need all of those in there, but similarity bias would, black hat thinking probably likes other black hat thinking, right? Like the white hats like white hats, red hats or blue hats, they like red or blue. So I think that's where I would say, as a business owner, look at where that could be a positive and where it could be a negative, and just have that real conversation.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful.
Second bias is the expedience bias. Expedience bias. We prefer to act quickly rather than take time. So we talk about different business owners and partnerships, and actually bringing similarity bias. So I'll use my partnership. I probably move towards expedience bias more than my true business partner, who does take time, and that at times is a challenge for me. Like, no, we got to move, right? Like we need to make a decision. I can't have another conversation about this. Like, let's just make a decision. And I've had to learn that I have an expedience bias for sure. We prefer to act quickly rather than take time. Now, this is the detail of this bias. Humans have a built-in need for certainty, to know what is going on. We so do. And the reason why we don't take the time is because it forces us to live in a period of uncertainty, which we're not comfortable with, because we have a built-in need for it. So we oftentimes just try to make a decision just so that there's a certain decision made, and it may not be the best one. A downside of that need is the tendency to rush to judgment without fully considering all the facts or all the options or the positives and negatives, the pros and cons. Like, again, positive, there's some positive in expedience bias. See, let me tell you, like I'll be the first person to push some positives around expedience bias, like let's get stuff done. But there's some negatives towards that as well. Expedience biases crop up when we are making decisions within the business or about people and rely solely on one data point or recommendation. Let me give you an example in our business. We go to an event, right? Or we listen to someone and they say, well, this is what I do. What you didn't hear is they said, well, this is what I'm thinking about doing, but that's a whole nother event conversation, right? Like I hear that from the stage all the time. Well, what we're going to do. And we think, awesome. Like if they did it, I'm doing it. So we get one data point. We're convinced that if they did it, I should do it. And we start implementing. We go down the path of starting something. We don't get the same results. And why? Because we made decisions around something with one data point or with one person's recommendation. The fix is to take more time to gather a wider array of information. Beware of our expedience bias. Expedience bias. We prefer to act quickly rather than take time. Some decisions can be made quickly. Other decisions take time. Sorry for my cough today. The third bias is the experience bias. We take our perception to be the objective of truth. We take our perception to be the objective of truth. What do you think that means? How is experience a bias, guys?
You've been there, done that, so you know.
Yeah. Oh, I know how that's supposed to work. Darren?
And I mean, everybody's perception is going to be jaded based on their own experience, but everybody is like, thinks that their reality is everybody's reality. And so I think that greatly will modify. I mean, it's like I've been taking a big class through Habitat for Humanity on racial equity and stuff like that. And it's like how a lot of African Americans view police when they get stopped in their car, right? Like, well, my reality is, I might get a speeding ticket, right? Well, they probably have a very different perception, and neither one of those is necessarily truth. They're both perceptions of truth based on our experience, and recognizing that we have those differences is going to be important, but it's biased by nature.
The way that the Neuroscience Institute explains it is we may be the stars of our own show, but other people see the world slightly different than we do. Experience bias occurs when we fail to remember that fact. We assume our view of a given problem or situation constitutes the whole truth.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you just take like me and you going to a rock concert together and standing 50 rows back, we're going to have a vastly different experience because of our own perception.
I am 100% confident that is true. So to escape that bias, we need to build in systems for others to check our thinking. I appreciate many of you, because once in a while I'll get a text, and I get this text from many of you, which is this is actually, whether or not you realize it, is you checking in on your experience bias. Hey, can I get your perspective on this? So I appreciate that. I have to ask myself, do I send that text as much? Or do I think I have an experience bias? 23 years later, like I know how this is supposed to go, 300 hires and 100 failed. I know how this is supposed to go. Like, do I make decisions with an experience bias, or am I willing to set? I mean, the fact is just by showing up today, this is an experience bias. With those on the session today saying, listen, I mean, most of you are wildly experienced, but you have come to just get a different perspective. And please believe me, like, this isn't my perspective. I'm just a conduit of information that has helped me. So this isn't my experience, but we are willing to check our experience bias and ask, like, could I think about it differently? Can I do something differently here? We have to build in systems for others to check our thinking, especially if we believe it's a good or if we believe it's a big decision. We were making some decisions, even organizationally or economically within the business recently. And I'll tell you, like, I had some experience bias. No, that's not, I wouldn't make that decision. That's not how to do it. Like I don't see that working, but constantly checking that with other people, right? Hey, can I get your perspective on this? Is important. Ask them to share their perspectives, help us reframe the situation. This goes hand in hand in last month's session as well, right? Our thinking models. Diversity in business can help us with this bias. And again, diversity in all things, diversity in skill set, diversity in background. It's interesting. Right now, my focus is to hire from outside of our industry, truly, right? I feel like we have a lot of experience bias from the industry, from 20, like we think we use that as a well, we've been here for 20 years. We've understood this industry for 40 years collectively, my partner and I. But that is a challenge if we're not bringing people from outside of the industry into our world. Diversity in business helps us with this bias. Remember, our perception is not always objective truth. Fourth bias is the distance bias. The distance bias. Distance biases have become all too common, especially over the past couple of years. And that's because we've operated at a distance. And if we're not careful, we will devalue the ability to do that or devalue perspective from a distance. They gave just a simple example for CEOs that are leading groups that may not show up in the same room every day now. And now as business kind of has this blended, like some people are here, some people aren't. If we're not careful, this bias shows up in meetings when some we have remote people and we have in-office people, and we tend to lean towards the people that are here, that are showing up, that are in office, right? That's just one example of a distance bias. It also shows up when someone's a little bit farther from the actual decision making. We at times devalue their perspective when in fact it may be wildly important, right? Well, I appreciate that, transaction coordinator, but you're not dealing with the customer. So we put them at this distance bias because their perspective to you as an agent might not be as important. But some of the greatest perspective is with those that do have a little bit of distance from the actual decision. The bias reflects our instinct to prioritize that which is nearby, whether in physical space, whether in time, or other domains. We can mitigate distance biases with systems that acknowledge important people, important ideas, important information outside of our immediate proximity. I was just having a cup of coffee with one of my favorite agents, and she asked me what my perspective of just a conference, right? A conference that sometimes we go to, sometimes we don't. And I said, you know what? I actually enjoy that conference, and to be transparent, it was the Inman conference, and I said I enjoy it, and it's because I actually like to hear other CEOs talk about the industry. Now, I also shared that it brings perspective, and I'm thankful to be led by an organization that has Gary as a leader, and not to say like it's the be all to end all, but I recognize what a very thoughtful and brilliant business leader we have running the organization. But I also hear different perspectives that is not his, right? Which causes me to look at that perspective and say, man, I value that more, right? Oftentimes, but I get to hear from people that I am wildly distant from in business model, in virtual, in public company versus private company. It's why I go, to actually make sure I'm not preferring just what's closer to me rather than further away. It builds appreciation, but it also gives me the ability to change my mind on things. Just one simple example of the distance bias. And the last bias that we're going to talk about today is the safety bias. I think probably as real estate business owners, this is one of the most dangerous. We protect against loss more than we seek out gain. The safety bias refers to the all too human tendency to avoid loss. We do this. As much recently when there's been so much loss, right, around us than ever. Like we have a bias to avoid loss. Many studies have shown that we would prefer not to lose money even more than we prefer to make money. So for instance, many of us pay way more taxes than we should because we're like, hey, just take the taxes. I'm going to save the money that I made, but I don't want to make a real estate investment that maybe it's not a good investment. And we give up the accelerated depreciation because we're not willing to take the risk. Like that is actually a safety bias. Like our financial worlds are wrought with this safety bias. People, the right hire, so often. I was having a conversation with Holly Priestner, one of our heads of people yesterday, and we were talking about a hire, and it was a big deal. And I went back to, well, we have this person, and I'm sure like collectively we can get that done. Part of it was a safety bias, as opposed to, well, what if that person doesn't work? And the commitment of a huge salary at the time, right, was maybe unsafe in my mind. We have to be careful based on where we come from. Many of us, and I love this industry for what it creates, many of us came from very little. And so if we come from very little, oftentimes we have a safety bias. I have a safety bias for sure, right? It leads me to be at times conservative. Interestingly enough, let me share an inside track. Like if you are in business with someone and you look at these biases, when you realize you have the same bias, like that's a challenge too. There's some brilliance in coming from nothing, like the work ethic and the get it done, and that is something that I honor and I respect greatly. However, if I'm not careful, if my partner's not careful, we'll come from a safety bias as well, because we both came from nothing, right? We have to be careful. It says, in other words, bad is stronger than good in a safety bias. Safety biases slow down decision-making and hold back healthy forms of risk-taking. One way we can mitigate the bias is by getting some distance between us and the decision. Imagining a past self already having made that choice successfully. Remember what this reminds you of? I'm not sure if that's an accurate sentence, but this is second-order thinking that we learned last month. Like, the decision is made, now let's go 2 steps ahead, weaken the perception of loss. Well, they were an amazing hire, right? They've generated more revenue than you could ever pay them in a salary. Weaken the perception of loss. These five biases in the Neuroscience Institute they call it the seeds model. These are the 5 seeds. Now the challenge for us, and I'm not gonna go deep into it, but these are just the main 5. These 5 have 20, 30, 40 different biases attached to each one of them. That's why it gets deep, right? It's a curriculum. But these 5 can really lead us, or an entire group or our entire organization, bringing in these biases as a common language as we make decisions, or as we're making business decisions with our partner or with our coach, asking, hey, do you believe that this is a safety bias for me? Do you think this is a distance bias? Do you think I'm acting under a similarity bias or an expedience bias or an experience bias? Having these conversations will allow us to make better business decisions, and also, at times, quicker business decisions, because we have models to make them under. Where else do you see the safety bias showing up in our world? Who wants to share? protecting against loss more than we seek out gain. Jen?
I just have a different point on it, but I think it's interesting that I'll use the word success, but the more success we get, this safety bias can often change and become smaller of what we feel like we now need. So for our family, I never would take anything out of Sold by Jen. Like, it would just sit there and the money would just sit there and the money would just sit there. My husband's like, can we please do something? I'm like, no, you never know, right? Or using a credit card and not paying off your credit card in full because you didn't know if you needed the money for somewhere else the next month. And so the safety bias one gets me a lot. And I married a man who is on the different spectrum on this one. I think it's interesting you talk about this and all of a sudden I go, gosh, that's really gotten smaller. I've worked on that really hard to not be overly safe on things because of my past experiences.
Yeah, I love that example. I think as I was mentioning, I think finances are one that it's easy to see where that shows up, but business decisions.
I mean, the other one obviously is hiring, right? Like, it's like you get burned once and, then who do you trust and how do you protect against that again? So.
Yeah. Or another one, anyone else want to share before I share another one? You see how good I am with the awkward silence? I love them. I'll share one. I think in the real estate business, our lead generation strategy and our lead flow is often a safety bias, right? It is easy for us to generate business without investing any money. If you have a good personality, if you have a great sphere group, if you have friends, if you've always gotten your business a certain way, we have to be careful that we're not 2 to 3 to 4 years out. We've put sort of walls around growth in our business based on that safety bias, based on us not being willing to recognize that the consumer of the future, if we truly care about them, we care about those clients because they are our sphere and our friend, our past clients and our generational, right, customer, that we don't have an offering that could serve them well, that we don't have tools for them to have cash before they sell, or to fix before they sell, or to buy before. Like, those are things that we might say, oh, that's not like, some people will sign up for that. Some people will need that it could be programmatic for us, that our safety bias doesn't want to take on the risk or the energy to go down the path to develop that or build that. It could very well be just building out a new flow of leads that are of unnets. I see this in a lot of big businesses. Well, I don't want to build that, develop that, hire to that, because it's a risk. Like, I like my business and who I work with today. That very well may be the case, and you as a human being may actually opt for that. But should the business be willing to take on some risk for the future growth of that business or the development of it? I'll share on the path to $1 million. I think one of the most important things for each of us to be doing today, some of you yesterday and some of you tomorrow, so let's just call it an average of today, that all of us today should be thinking about what it looks like when we aren't living in the town that we're living in today, because you may not be, right? So some of that was forced on us because we just don't like the economics of our state. Some of us don't like the politics of our cities. Some of us don't like the condition of it. Like, we have to be able to look at our business of having legs and running, whether or not we are there doing it or not. And if that's the case, are we making safety decisions today based on how it's always been? Which actually is this combination of safety bias and similarity bias, right? We prefer to run the business like it's always been run, as opposed to it looking different in 2022 or 2023. If we're not thinking about the future, that's where you see sort of these run-ups in businesses. and based on life decisions, good life decisions, by the way, right? Healthy life decisions of not doing the same thing or not working the same number of hours if we don't need to work those same number of hours, but the business itself should operate separately. And I think our industry historically has come from a place that you are the business. And we want that because we are so important and integral to the process, but the business itself needs to be able to operate without you, whether your name is on it or not. Don't let the identity of the business be you. There's some safety in having it that way because it's always been that way. Anything else on this before we switch gears? Then I'm going to take our last 15 minutes to talk about something that I think is important for us to be thinking about for the last 2 weeks of the year. And that is that commitment equals freedom. Commitment equals freedom. Now, it would seem to me that the more I commit, the less freedom I have. The more I say yes, the less freedom I have. The more I put in my calendar, the less freedom I have. The more commitments I make to people or systems or processes or strategies or priorities or goals, the less freedom I have. But the reality is, the greater commitment I make, the more freedom I will have. That is actually in psychology called prospection. Whatever view you have of your future, that is what is driving your present. As you look at the screen, some of you are incredibly classic examples of this, right? You have a very clear picture of what that future looks like, and actually your present, which is week by week, day by day, year by year, right? You've executed that. Like you made decisions, good, bad, safe, unsafe, easy, hard, based on the view of your future. You see where you want to go and you consistently make decisions. Some people would say, why did you make that decision? Why don't you do this? Why don't you double down on over here? Why aren't you selling more real estate? Like, why are you buying that? Like the fact is that is their prospection. And we should be honoring that instead of questioning that. Human beings are not products of the past. So thank God for that, not for most of us, for some of us. I'm speaking about myself, so I don't want to say most, but thank God, right? We are not products of our past. We are products of the future that we set in front of themselves. Now, this is not intended to be like this motivational last 12 minutes. Like I'm not that person. This is real. And we know that is real because if you've read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, this was played out time and time and time and time again in work camps, labor camps, concentration camps in Nazi Germany, in Hungary, and in many, many countries. Oh, as you read that book, he recognized that it meant survival. Those that had prospection, those that saw clearly themselves outside of that camp, interestingly enough, they lived. Not all of them, but many of them. And those that couldn't see past the strategy of where is my meal coming from, or the activity that they were handed that day, they died, healthy or not. He said this, and I'm going to apply it to business, and please take it the right way. He said, those that had a clear goal lived, as long as they had a clear pathway. And as long as they had a sense of agency. So goal, process, control. It doesn't matter how great of a business owner we are, I promise, at some point in time. And it doesn't matter how great of a year you're having. Many of us are coming off the best years of our life. And at some point in time this year, and at some point in time last year, I promise you will hit this place of like, why am I doing this? like, what is this all for? Like, is it worth it? Those questions will show up. If we don't have a clear goal, a clear process or pathway to that goal, and a sense of agency, meaning this, that I have some control over my life and decisions today, then we will tap out. We will not have clear prospection. Is that fair? We think through what was hardest for those individuals around Viktor Frankl. Well, they probably had a goal to live, right? That probably was their goal. And their pathway or process, that probably got a little fuzzier. Like, how am I going to do this? Right? I don't feel well. I'm not strong. I'm not eating as much as I should. Like, their process got fuzzy, but you know what got the fuzziest? Like, I don't have any control here. I don't have zero control. I have zero sense of agency. But he said those that were able to imagine what that was, what purpose they were serving, and what they could use, what lessons they could use outside of the camps to teach others or to live differently then, right? To live stronger. Like, they had clear goal, pathway, and agency. Then you think about it. Every behavior we take is based on achieving a goal. It doesn't matter what it is. I was listening to an interview about agency just a few days ago, and they said, walk into your refrigerator is a behavior based on achieving a goal. It's based on achieving a goal of feeding yourself or tasting something good or getting fuel. Like, every behavior is based on achieving a goal. So if decision making is for the purpose of choosing the right behavior, make commitments, right? Have a clear goal going into 2022. Create pathways, right? Which are the strategies on your GPS. I preach GPS, and people are like I'm just putting my head down and working. But the reality is the G is your goal. Like, that's that clear goal. Your pathway are the strategies, the S's of that document. Do you have a clear pathway and a process to get that done? And an agency is someone's got to raise their hand and say they're going to do it. Like, our teams should be built around agency. Do we have control of these activities? Now, we have to be connected to that goal. In his book, he said we need a higher sense of purpose and goal that gives our present context. Otherwise, you know how we feel? And if we feel it, I promise your people will. What we're asking them to do or what we're asking ourselves to do will lose context, right? And that's when we get the, like, what am I doing this for? Like, I don't need this money. Right. But see, if the goal is unclear, if I don't understand what that money is for, what the purpose is for, where I'm going, or what that's going to do for my family or an organization or other people, we will lose context. And context is one of the most important things as you're building your organization. Do you have context? Does the business have context? Does your buyer's agent have context? Does your listing agent have context? Does your staff have context? Present activity has zero meaning if it's not connected to the future. And that's why, if we have not laid out a very clear goal, priority, and strategy for each of our people, I promise you someone will tap out. The Great Resignation is about context. The Great Resignation is realizing that the activities that they chose to do have zero context to the future that they are convinced that they might be looking for, or they're fuzzy on. See, they actually might have had some goals and some pathways, but they actually didn't feel like they had control. And if they don't feel like they have control over it, then they will lose context in that present pathway or goal as well. So we have to be careful. Don't devalue the goal setting process. Don't devalue that future. Don't devalue the outcome, because if you do, we will lose meaning. It's interesting. They asked Angela Duckworth, right? I mean, great author. She's sort of shown up as, I think it's funny, as behavioral psychologists have become mainstream because they've written books that we enjoy reading. And we have in the industry, or business owners, realized that, well, gosh, we need some grit. And so we read her book, Grit. But she said this: maturity is committing to key pathways on your path to achieving a goal, while also uncommitting to pathways that are not contributing. Behavioral psychologist, right? That has studied goal accomplishment and behavioral change for literally decades. So commitment to that goal, priority, and strategy will bring freedom, as long as we built it the right way. Everything else works itself out. The bad days work themselves out in 2022 as long as our present has context to the future. We're going to want to uncommit. I promise. But if we made the commitment at a certain point in time, we knew it wasn't impossible, or else we wouldn't have made that commitment. Now, if it's impossible and you made a commitment, then you have a terrible GPS, right? Like, so revisit that. But if we made the commitment because we knew we could do it, yes, it might be difficult, but if we stick with the commitment, it frees us up. It adds freedom. Number one, it actually frees us from decision fatigue. See, if we know what we need to do this year, right? Each month, each quarter, if we know what we need to do, we're not going to have decision fatigue. Here's where we're going to get decision fatigue, which was where we started, right? Like the streamlining decisions. We have decision fatigue when we don't know what strategies we're supposed to execute this month. We don't really know where the business is supposed to come from. And then we're trying to make decisions every single day of like, do I do that? Do I spend that money? Do I invest that money? Do I knock on those doors? Do I hire another agent? Do I not? Because we didn't make that commitment day one. So commitment eliminates decision fatigue, but it also enables us to just get the results of sticking to the commitment, and that brings freedom. Like, you think about anything that we commit to, it brings freedom. Like sticking to a diet brings us the freedom of good health. Like sticking to a long-term relationships. Man, there's lots of, you might think, well, that's a ball and a chain, but I believe that long-term relationship brings us incredible freedom and incredible benefits as well, right? So there is freedom in all commitments. Once you commit, Viktor Frankl said, yeah, you must go through the process of learning how to fulfill that commitment. But when you do, there are always benefits and freedoms that come with it. So for your notes, I promise you that business GPS for 2022 will be that freedom. It will be attached to that preferred future, right? The goal will be clear. The strategy or the process, as Viktor says, that process will be clear. The agency, you saying, yes, I can do that. Yes, I have control over that. Or knowing who in your organization has control over that will be clear, which allows us to stay in context day by day with the end result. So last thing we're going to go through today was actually a slide that I showed you on our first Path to a Million session. And it was what Gary says gets in the way. Gary wrote down 10 things that get in the way between us and our business goals, right? It was the 10 things that get between us and becoming a millionaire, but let's just rephrase it and say it's what gets in the way between us and our business goal. Number one, we don't think or act like a business person. We think like a real estate agent. We think like an entrepreneur. We just stop thinking like a business person. We don't wake up each day and say, hey, I'm here to make some decisions around the business as a business owner. Number two, we don't think big with the end in mind, right? We think about this year, right? We think about oftentimes as real estate agents, we think about beating last year, right? We think about how do we go from 26 homes to 46? How do we go from 100 to 125? How do we go from 30 to 50? But we don't think about what our world looks like when we're not running it or when we're not working in it. We don't think big with the end in mind. We oftentimes don't build our business around a database. And that means we don't think about how that database should work. We don't think about what the purpose of it is. We don't think about growing it every single week. We don't think about, could someone else run this database or understand it? We just don't look at our business and give the database enough value. We don't make lead generation our one thing. Whatever it is your responsibility is to your business today, is it generating buyers? Awesome. You don't make it your one thing. Is it generating sellers? Probably in this group it is, as you'll notice, number 5. Is it generating talent, right? Is it talking to talent? Is it whatever that lead generation strategy is it finding investment opportunities because that's the phase of your life right now? Well, then that's your lead generation, right? Understand where you are. Your present has to have context, right, from your future or your preferred future. Number 5, you don't focus on listings. At the end of the day, I believe the way that our business is going, this becomes more and more and more and more important. Interestingly enough, you say, well, is that the most important thing? Like, my business has been heavy buyer. Of course it has. But the reality is take a look at almost every strategy out there right now. Non-real estate, brilliant entrepreneur, business people, MBA, VC firms, right? Like prop tech. That prop tech industry, although they're thinly disguised as solutions for buyers and money, almost every single one of them, they understand that the income comes from those listings. All those strategies are really listing strategies, whether they're referring those listings to people that are willing to pay them, whether they're listing those homes because they are now in relationship with that seller and everything that happens afterwards, right, with that seller. Like, it is a listing focused business. It always will be, right? It is being in relationship with people that own real estate. Number 6, we don't stick to the plan. Right? We change our process. We've lost context, interestingly enough. Number 7, and this is going to be for all of us, unless we just want to be the producer in our business forever, we don't master hiring. And I know we talk about it a lot. We're going to talk about it more next year as well. We don't master hiring, and that's actually what has helped is for me to actually research all different hiring processes for all different industries, not just one, not just real estate and not just one process, but we don't master hiring. Number 8, we don't manage our money. As we continue the Path to $1 Million series next year, our focus is going to switch a little bit from decision making and a little bit more towards wealth building and money management next year. So I hope you'll stick with us. Number 9, we don't disrupt the competition, right? Which means we are not willing to innovate. Stuart Butterfield shared something in a recent interview. He's the CEO and founder of Slack. And he said, innovation is ultimately doing anything that causes behavioral change. So your team should be wildly innovative because your team's value to the real estate agent that's going to work with you and plug into your systems is do you cause agents to change their behavior and do things like you have done them to become successful? Like you disrupt or you innovate by changing behavior. He has changed behavior in communication and business through his platform. In fact, probably 7 months ago, maybe 6 months ago, we shared one of my favorite essays of all time, Stuart Butterfield, when he wrote, "We don't sell saddles here." Remember that? We don't sell saddles here. He began to change how people behaved. His company did that. He was an innovator in that space. Is your company changing the behavior of a consumer or changing the behavior of real estate agents? And number 10, we don't tie our charity or our giving to our business. Money is good for what it can do, and a lot of people in this world need a lot of help. And so as we help, whether it's helping our community, whether it's helping the schools that our kids go to, whether it's helping, I see so many parents, and I love it, based on their kids' age. They're helping out with the sports program that their sons are part of, and our contribution, like, we think charity is money. No, that's time. We are contributing to that child's world. And interestingly enough, if we find strategic ways to show up in contribution to people and also attach our business to that, it actually will cause people to want to support you. In corporate America, this is what companies have done. They've put their mission out, right, in front of the world, and people want to support companies that show up as doing good in the world. It's why some Pacific Northwest companies have done so well. It's why Patagonia has done well. Like, people get behind their mission. Nike for so long has been supported by the world because of the good that it did. And we saw what happened when it looked like they weren't doing as much good. And with new leadership, I truly believe they're showing back up and doing good. Like, we need to do that as well. Interestingly enough, on the path to make and earn and to net and then to give, Gary says, make sure we make that connection. One, it's going to make us feel more fulfilled, but it's going to be a huge value to the communities and to our business as well. So with that, we're gonna wrap it up. We covered the gamut today of really diving in a little bit more in how we think, as well as making some incredible commitments, and what that does for our future. And lastly, just keeping in mind that the things that prevent us from becoming phenomenal CEOs. Leslie, anything before we wrap up?
No, I just want to say huge thank you to all of you who have participated in this Path to a Million series. We so appreciate you. Katie and I are working very, very hard on our calendar and our opportunities for 2022. So please stay tuned for what that looks like. We are bringing back some really cool experiences. We are talking about what the Master Series and the Path to a Million and our masterminds are going to look like. So watch out for those in the next couple of weeks. And we cannot commit that we will be same day and time in 2022. So make sure that you watch your calendars, and Katie and I will make sure that you are aware of any special changes that are coming your way. That's all I got, you guys. Thank you so much and have an amazing, powerful day.